I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and I have no idea what episode this is. It has been forever since we have been together last, and contrary to popular opinion, I am not, in fact, dead. 2025 has not been great, with the exception of the election of President Trump, or the inauguration, I should say, of President Trump and his first few weeks in office. I have spent 3 weeks of this year already dealing with ailments. I lost an entire week of my. I had a week of vacation that I had scheduled at the beginning of the year, right after Christmas. Lost all of that because I spent the whole time on the couch sick. Had to reschedule some get-togethers, and then we had the flu go through the house, which I have not had in like 15 years, and it's awful. I can just tell you, if you have not had it, it is terrible, and 0 stars, do not recommend. It is terrible. Avoid it at all costs. Somehow, my daughter did not get it. My wife and I both got it, and we were kind of out of commission for almost 2 weeks. My wife is still dealing with the after effects of it, so prayers for her and for speedy recovery as we continue to slowly but surely get better. This is episode number 433, by the way, and welcome aboard, and thank you all for listening and for your forbearance for my disappearance for the last few weeks. It has been crazy. I think the last episode released was January 26th, and it just so happens that I pre-recorded that well in advance, so I haven't actually been able to do a whole lot. Podcast wise, so good to be back with you. Glad to join you again for another episode, and I thank you all for listening and for joining in. Today I want to talk about the Super Bowl. What a great game, wasn't it? An amazing game. Just kidding, I haven't watched a Super Bowl in probably 10 years, and I could not care less. Absolutely do not care. I did see some of the Super Bowl ads, which were, looked like brands, like Jeep and others trying, and Bud Light trying to play the patriotism card and the bro card to try to fix the damage that they've done to their brands over the years by pandering to the woke. So that was a nice thing to see, but did not watch the game, do not care. This past weekend, I was actually at another volleyball tournament for my daughter, which absolutely wrecked my back. Bleacher seats for 2 straight days, not pleasant. Came home Sunday night, crashed on the couch, and decided I'm going to stretch my back out and watch a movie. And because Monday morning I've got to be sitting at my desk all day, and so I need to avoid sitting on my rump for a few days, for as many hours as possible, so that I can actually endure sitting at my desk. So I decided I would watch a movie while I was doing this. Over the time I had the flu, I watched Equalizer 2. And I don't know whether you're familiar with the Equalizer series of movies. I decided to watch Equalizer 3 this past weekend. These movies are kind of based on the original. I don't know whether as a kid, I was a fan of the TV show, The Equalizer. I don't remember the name of the guy who was the star, but the movies are starring Denzel Washington, who is a retired CIA operative who now uses his skills to help the little guy. And that's sort of what the TV show was about. A secret agent guy in retirement who, gets tired of seeing the little guy being roughed up by villainous powers and decides to make use of those skills that he acquired during his service to go out and help people. And the first movie of the new movies, I don't remember when it came out. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. The second was almost as good. I think that one came out in 2018. The third one came out 2023, and not quite as good as I would say. It was probably the weakest of the three, but it was still really good. I still enjoyed it a lot. And without spoiling the plot too much, Washington's character, Robert McCall, ends up being injured during one of his side missions in Italy, where he's apparently gone to recover. I think they explain at the end. I'll leave it. I won't explain. He's gone to Italy to track down some ill-gotten funds that were taken from a poor pensioner, and he ends up, because he makes a mistake, he gets shot, and he's discovered slumped over in his car by the side of the road, and he's taken to a country doctor in a beautiful town on the Italian coast, where this man takes him in, feeds him, heals his wounds. It's a Good Samaritan kind of story, which I thought was interesting. Find the man on the side of the road, take him in and take care of him. And he decides to take care of him because he asks him, one of the first things he asks McCall after removing the bullet from his back, are you a good man or are you a bad man? And McCall says he doesn't know. And according to this doctor, he says, well, only a good man would answer that question that way. So he takes him in, he helps him get back on his feet. And during his convalescence, McCall explores the town, meets the people, finds the town lovely and welcoming, and decides this is where he wants to sort of settle down and stay and just make this his home going forward. Problem is, though, that the mafia has an interest in this little town and driving some of the local businesses away so that they can create more lucrative illicit businesses like casinos. And the local police are powerless to stop them. In fact, the policeman who finds McCall at the start of the movie, the guy who brings McCall to that doctor, his family ends up being tormented by these thugs as a warning to others to kind of mind their own business and stay out of it. And of course, McCall naturally can't help but get involved in an effort to protect the town and its people. And this is a classic, little guy versus the big bad guy story that you find in all of the Equalizer movies, but it's not just Equalizer. I mean, this is a classic story at its core, which you'd find in movies like Batman or Reacher or Unforgiven or John Wick, even Blazing Saddles. The little guy who decides to stand up for little people who are defenseless against a greater evil. And this got me to thinking about the concept, the idea of vengeance. The Bible makes it clear that we're to leave vengeance to the Lord. It also makes clear that our station, our vocation as citizen, unless you're a member of the police or the courts, is to leave the administration of justice to those duly appointed by God. So we look at Romans chapter 13 as one that we routinely turn to, the best sort of source for this idea. Romans chapter 13. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God. They who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves, for rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Then do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is a minister of God to you for your good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. So, government is ordained by God to punish the wicked. It is not something that we are given to do. It is not, unless you are a member of the police or the courts, unless you are a government official, it is not your role to, it is not your vocation to bear the sword and to punish the wicked. But now, we've talked about this many times. You are allowed to bear the sword to defend yourself and your family and your loved ones when they are threatened. This is part of the explanation of the fifth commandment. But this movie and others like it made me think about this question. What if there is no authority? Or what if that authority is so corrupt, so thoroughly undermined that they are not able to protect the public? At what point does it become acceptable for the common citizen to act on behalf of his or her neighbor? Because Romans 13 goes on to talk about love of neighbor. It says in reading chapter 13, verse 9 and following, for this, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up by this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. So, if you are acting in defense of a neighbor out of love for that neighbor, that is a fulfillment of the law. But again, what about the situation where you have bad people doing bad things, and the government, the authority established by God, is unable or incapable or unwilling to do anything to stop it? Now, this is a fictional story, of course. It's a movie. It's not based on a real story, but there are real-life examples. And the one that comes to mind is the story of Ken McElroy from Skidmore, Missouri. Ken McElroy was the town bully, and from all accounts, he was a vile piece of crap. He dropped out of school at age 15 and turned to crime and womanizing. Over the course of more than 20 years, he was suspected and indicted 21 times for various thefts and for violence, but avoided prosecution when, surprise, surprise, witnesses were unwilling to testify against him. The entire town was scared of Ken McElroy, including the authorities. He fathered at least 10 children with different women, including his last wife, whom he met and raped when she was just 12, and he was 35. McElroy forced the girl's parents to consent to their relationship by threatening to burn down their house and killing their family dog. And no, he didn't work for the ATF. He just was a piece of crap. He married her when she was 14, thus avoiding charges of statutory rape. But when the girl gave birth to a child and then fled back to her parents, McElroy showed up at their home, retrieved her, took her back, killed their new dog, so he's now killed 2 dogs, and then actually followed through on his previous threats and burned their home to the ground. Charged with arson, assault, and statutory rape in 1973, he got out on bond and stalked the girl and the foster home where the child was placed. He was never convicted of any of those charges, by the way. 3 years later, in 1976, he shot a local farmer who confronted him over hunting on private property, and McElroy again avoided prosecution by intimidating witnesses and smearing the reputation of his accuser. In 1980, one of McElroy's many children, who apparently didn't fall far from the family tree, was accused of theft by a local shop owner. McElroy began stalking the store owner and then confronted him one day in his own store with a shotgun, shooting the man in the neck. McElroy was convicted, finally, but he was freed on bail, pending an appeal. He then took an M1 Garand rifle, fitted with a bayonet, and went to a local tavern and began to level very graphic threats against the store owner who had accused his son and himself of shooting him in the neck. How dare he? Shortly thereafter, the townspeople met with the sheriff to discuss what could be done to protect themselves from Ken McElroy. They were scared to death of this guy, and with good reason. The sheriff's advice was not to confront him, but maybe they should form a neighborhood watch. A lot of good that did. And then he left the meeting and left town. Word reached the meeting that McElroy was back in town and hanging out at a local bar. What happened next is shrouded in some mystery. Townspeople apparently surrounded McElroy's truck, where he was sitting with his wife, quote unquote. Multiple shots were fired into the truck, striking McElroy at least twice, killing him. And of the 46 witnesses to the shooting, not a single one of them could name who the shooters were. And the DA declined to press charges, and a federal investigation which followed failed to turn up enough evidence to convict anyone of that murder. The wife, who was sitting in the car during the shooting, filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against the city, which was ultimately settled for just a little over $17,000. Journalists described the attitude of the witnesses as saying that old Ken McElroy just needed killing. And you got to admit, given his track record, he probably had it coming. So the question in that case, in this real life example, at what point is it justified for a citizen to take the law into their own hands in defense of a neighbor? if the government cannot or will not do anything. What do you think? Now, I'm not advocating vigilante justice, but where government is helpless or unwilling or complicit in crimes against the innocent, at what point should the citizen and can the citizen, with a clean conscience, step in and do something? The answer, I think, the best answer comes to us in the explanation of the fifth commandment, which I will attempt to find. You would think I would have this committed to memory, but I don't. So forgive me for that. All right. You shall not murder. What does this mean? Here's the explanation. We should fear and love God, that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need. The Large Catechism goes further to suggest that we should step in to save and defend our neighbor from harm if it is possible for us to do so. Because to avoid helping our neighbor would be like seeing our neighbor struggling in deep water, and instead of going in and saving them, we stood and watched them drown. And in that case, not doing something to defend your neighbor, you would be as guilty as the person who actually killed them. So, based on that, I think it's clear that the actions of characters in movies like The Equalizer and similar movies like it, the citizens in the case of the Ken McElroy shooting, are mostly unjustified. Mostly. For example, there's a scene in The Equalizer 3. Bad guys come into a restaurant. They threaten a bunch of innocent people. Good guy steps in and stops them. We've seen that in real life many times. And good guy, in this case, is totally in the right to do so. He's not acting as a vigilante. He's not taking on the role of the government. He's not exacting vengeance against the bad guy. He is showing love for his neighbor by defending them. Now, good guy seeks out bad guys and kills them in entertaining and amazing ways. Not good. Entertaining on the movie screen, maybe, but not good in terms of morality. This is taking the vocation of the state upon yourself. And like I said, though entertaining, it's not something that we're permitted to do under the fifth commandment or any other. Good guy in that case is committing murder, even if the person being killed is himself a bad guy. Unless you're killing in defense of someone else, when the bad guy is in the act of threatening or harming someone else, you're violating the commandment. And what about the real life case of Ken McElroy? His neighbors said he just needed killing. He was a menace to society, and the government failed repeatedly for 2 decades to do anything about it. But his murder was just that. Murder, plain and simple. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not crying any tears or lamenting the death of Ken McElroy. He was a piece of garbage. And had he been killed by one of his fellow citizens while in the act of, I don't know, burning down his wife's parents' house, or threatening the shopkeeper, or shooting the shopkeeper in the neck, or waving an M1 Garand with a bayonet around at a local tavern, at that point, a citizen could have stepped in, confronted him, and if necessary, shot him to defend other patrons and other citizens, to defend the neighbor. So while the Bible does leave vengeance to the Lord and places the authority of violence in the hands of the state, it does not delegate that authority to citizens, even in the event that the state fails to do its job. It's up to you to defend yourself and your neighbors from immediate harm, but you don't have the authority to go out looking for a fight with the town bully or the criminal gang that's terrorizing your town. You can act with good conscience, with clear conscience in defense of your neighbor, for the love of your neighbor, but you cannot act as a vigilante like Robert McCall or Bruce Wayne. That vocation is not given to you. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. That means that sometimes we have to endure and suffer at the hands of evil men in this fallen world. But if we are faced with a situation where we can protect ourselves and others from imminent danger, we have every right, and actually we have an obligation, a duty, dare I say, to defend. Little pitch for a cool book that if you haven't read, I would recommend you check out. Duty to Defend, Volume 2, which is a collection of some amazing articles from ordained Lutheran pastors from around the country talking about the verses in the Bible that are commonly used or misused in discussing things like self-defense or gun rights. Check it out at the Armed Lutheran Shop or on Amazon. We do have signed copies available if you are interested. armedlutheran.us/duty, D-U-T-Y. What are your thoughts about this? What do you think about this subject? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any comments or questions, visit the feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voice message. We would love to hear your thoughts on this matter or any other suggestions for future episodes. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Till we get together again for episode 434. I can't remember what episode it is. Keep shooting. Keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.